Hi, my name is Pastor Russell Mullenberg, and this is Eat This Word, a weekly program where I serve up bite-sized bits of Bible. The passage I'd like to look at with you this week and next is Psalm 130. We'll look at the entire psalm. It's 8 verses. We're going to look at it in 2 parts. The first 4 verses this week, and then the final 4 verses next week. So Psalm 130, we'll start with verses 1 and 2. It says, "Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy." Now, every psalm in the Catholic Church has a Latin name. It's usually just the first 1 or 2 words of the psalm in Latin. And a lot of them in Protestantism we haven't held on to. But this one, the Latin name De Profundis, has sort of stuck to Psalm 130. This is a profound psalm. Something that's profound, that means it's got an extraordinary depth of emotion or meaning to it. And really, as we look at Psalm 130 and this cry for mercy, this cry for help out of the depths, we see that it is a very profound psalm. So, 8 verses. You can break these 8 verses into 2-verse stanzas, 4 stanzas in total. Today we'll look at the first 2 stanzas, starting again with verses 1 and 2. And here is this profound cry for mercy. The psalmist, and we're not sure who the psalmist is. Many of the psalms are attributed to David or some other author, but this one has no author attributed to it, so we don't know much about the specific historic circumstances in which this psalm is written, but we know that this psalmist is in a place of profound suffering, a place of profound need and desperation. Some of the suffering we're going to see is kind of his own making, but nevertheless, he cries out. The way he describes it is crying out from the depths. In the Bible, the depths, the ocean, are symbolic of evil. The sea is sort of a metaphor for lostness, and so the psalmist is crying out. He's in over his head. And he's crying out to the Lord and begging the Lord to pay attention to what he's desperate. And it's in this position of desperation that he cries out to God. Think of it this way. If you were invited to visit someone of high rank or prestige, maybe the Queen of England or something like that, think about how nervous you'd feel about how you were going to address royalty and just all of the protocols and things that you need to follow. I remember a few years ago, the First Lady was visiting the Queen, and the Queen sort of stumbled, and the First Lady reached out, grabbed the Queen by the elbow, and how much was made of that? Because if you're not royal and you're in the presence of royalty, you don't touch royalty, and so there's all this pomp and circumstance, and here's the psalmist addressing the God of the universe, the King of heaven, and there's none of that. There's no pomp, there's no circumstances, there's no formality. It's just this cry of desperation. Lord, I am drowning, pay attention to me. A quote by a man named Walter Brueggemann. He says, "This psalm is the miserable cry of a nobody from nowhere." And really, that's what makes it a wonderful psalm for all of us. It's not based on a historic situation. It's not really based on who this psalmist is. This can be any of us. In a moment of realization that we are desperate for God's help, that we're in over our heads, and we cry out to God. No formality, no pretense, just, God, help me. Brueggemann finishes this quote by saying this: "It's that cry that penetrates the veil of heaven." So the first thing we kind of see, this first stanza of Psalm 130, is that we need to come desperate to God. I think of Jesus and his answer to the Pharisees when they questioned the time he was spending among the deplorables of his day. And his answer in Mark chapter 2 was this. Jesus says, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor." The doctor isn't doing the rounds around Olympic athletes, people who are in prime condition and best shape of their life. It's the sick. The doctor goes to the hospital. He goes where people do not feel well. And Jesus says, I've come not to call the righteous, but sinners. It's people who recognize their desperation and their need for help, who cry out to God. That's the cry that God is pleased to hear. So let's go back to Psalm 130. Look at the second stanza, verses 3 and 4. It says, if you, Lord, kept the record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there's forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you. So the second stanza is about the blessedness of forgiveness, the confidence that in God there's grace. And the psalmist, he's talking to God, but he's almost preaching to himself. He's reminding himself of this truth. He's in a desperate situation. He's in over his head. Some of that clearly is a situation of his own making, his own sins that have put him there. And yet he's confident that he's reminding himself that in God there's help. So that's the good news. That's the good news of this psalm. But before you get to the good news, you've got to talk about the bad news. And so the psalmist recognizes if God keeps a record of our sins, we're all in trouble. I have this picture of the angels up in heaven. So one way of thinking, this picture, the Lord keeping a record of sins, and I don't know why, I think of the angels in heaven like in an old-timey accounting office, like from the 1930s with the adding machines and just rows and rows of papers. And if the angels kept a record of our sins, if they were just toting up all of our sins and keeping a logbook for all of us, if that were the case, the psalmist tells us then we're all in trouble. We take it back to the psalm and it says, who could stand? Right? If our sins were like debt, money owed to God, we'd all be bankrupt if he's up there keeping track, and we'd be in trouble. But the good news, the but God of this passage, verse 4, but with you, but God, with you there's forgiveness. That's our hope. That's our confidence. The old hymn says it like this: Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, but he washed it white as snow. And so this psalm, Psalm 130, it's a profound psalm. This man finds himself in over his head, desperate, in a situation somewhat of his own making, his own sin that is culpable in the situation he finds himself in. But it's for sinners like that God came. It's for sinners like that forgiveness is available. And so we're directed to cry out to God and to remember, to remind ourselves that there's forgiveness. Now, knowing that to be true and acting on it are not always the same thing. And so when we come back next week, we're going to look at how we can cling to hope even in the midst of our profound need. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you appreciate this video and you'd like more people to see it, it really helps if you push like or share on Facebook, or if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I want to let you know that there's a website now called eatthisword.com. You can learn a little bit more information about what we're doing, videos like this and others, as well as a Patreon page. Patreon is an online way to raise funds to help support creative projects like this. And if you would like to see more videos like this, you could help us financially.